My name is Samuel, although everyone calls me Sam. I'm in my last year of psychology and my life isn't much different from any other kid my age, but it used to be something else. At the beginning of my degree, I experienced something that seemed like something out of a horror movie, something that opened my eyes about people and all the darkness they can harbor in their hearts. It all started when I met my roommate, Edmund. Ed was a typical boy who kept to himself and had a lot of trouble connecting with others. He was also short and chubby, wore glasses, and in general, his appearance wasn't the most graceful, which made him a perfect target for bullying from the bullies we had as roommates. At first, we hardly treated each other, but as time went by, I started to get to know him better, and I realized that he was a great guy. The problem was that these roommates bullied him all the time, and were always making fun of him and embarrassing him in public. But no one noticed that Ed was in love with a girl, and as if it was a romantic movie cliché, that girl was the ex of one of the cruelest bullies on campus, so of course he was in real trouble. One day, he came to our room all beat up and told me that some guys had attacked him on campus for no apparent reason. They just saw him and started hitting him. At that point, I suggested he talk to the administration, but we both knew that was useless. They never did anything, no matter how serious the problems were. That night, Ed simply threw himself on his bed, asked me to keep it quiet, and fell asleep. Or so he pretended, because as he lay there, I heard his muffled sobs, trying to hide his pain. That early morning, I was awakened by a strange noise. It was mumbling accompanied by a scratching sound like something being scratched, but when I turned to look for where the sound was coming from, I found myself in front of Ed. He was on the edge of the bed, shaking and scribbling frantically on the floor with a pen. At that moment, I ran to him to try to calm him down, but he suddenly lunged at me, trying to jab the pen at me. I looked at him confused, and when he realized it was me, he simply hugged me and burst into tears. In that instant, I realized that Ed needed help. Days went by, and I tried to convince him to see a psychologist, but he flatly refused. As a psychology student, I knew how important it was to take care of mental health, and based on what I had witnessed a few nights ago, it was evident that Edmund should seek help, because he seemed to be having a nervous breakdown by all accounts. So I tried everything I could to convince him, but there was no way. At that point, it occurred to me that introducing him to the girl he liked so much might at least make his mood improve, and I was excited by the idea, but to my surprise, it turned out that he already knew her, although I didn't know it at the time. So I set up a blind date between them, without telling Ed who she was. And Cynthia, I just told her that I had a friend she might like to meet, and that he would be waiting for her on campus on Friday at 10:30 p.m. I knew that no one would bother them, because just that night, there would be a party that the girl would not go to in order to avoid running into her ex, so everything was set. They would meet on campus, and I would go to the party, in the hope that everything would go well, and Ed would finally have a moment of happiness after so much harassment. However, I was about to be in for a big surprise. While I was at the party, I suddenly ran into Cynthia's ex, the same guy who was taking it out on Ed all the time. I was with some friends and had had a little too much to drink. I've always been a bad drinker, so I avoid going overboard with my drinks as much as possible, so I don't end up doing stupid things and regretting it later. But that night, I didn't care too much. So, in a moment of madness, I went up to this thug, grabbed him by the jacket and told him to stop bothering Ed, or he'd deal with me. But his reaction shocked me. Instead of hitting me, he just stood there, helpless. And instead of calling his friends and making a circus, this guy just stood there talking to me, and what he said left me speechless. "You're Edmund's partner, aren't you?" he asked me calmly. "Yes, I am," I answered, still pulling his jacket. "Why are you defending a psycho-stalker?" he said. "What do you mean by that?" I replied, confused. That's when he revealed something I would have never imagined. That little freak stalked my ex-girlfriend for years. Before we were on campus, he would stand outside her house spying on her. He would send letters to her parents and creepy messages to her, not to mention chasing her all the time and showing up everywhere. Cynthia had to put a restraining order against him and everything, and even then, she's also had to deal with him being a student at the same college to keep stalking her for sure. I was perplexed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious about what you're telling me?" I asked, half in shock. 100%. I'm not a bully. You don't understand me because you're new, but everyone here avoids Edmund, and how the university authorities never do anything. We all do our own justice here. He blurted out, and at first everything he said sounded weird, but after a while I started to connect the dots. I remembered all those times I had seen pictures of the girl on the desk, and how sometimes Ed acted very strangely. I couldn't justify what had happened the other night, but something in my head clicked. I remembered that I had set up a date between him and the girl that same night without telling him. Without thinking about it, right then and there I ran out of the party toward the campus. It was 10:40 p.m. then, so maybe I could still do something before the situation got out of hand, but when I got to the meeting place, no one was there. I figured the girl hadn't shown up after all, and I set out to go back to the room to see if Ed was asleep, crying, or on something more serious. But suddenly I heard a scream coming from the gym, and it was clearly from a woman. I ran as fast as I could and saw that the door was open. There were muddy footprints on the floor, some girls, and behind them, a man's. Damn, I hoped I wasn't too late. I entered the gym quietly amidst the dense darkness. I walked slowly, hoping to hear some noise that would tell me where they were, and after taking a few steps I heard sobbing a few meters away, and also the thump of something falling. I approached, alert and with my heart in my throat, when suddenly Ed appeared, stepping out of the shadows. "Hey, what are you doing here? What happened?" I asked him. "Don't worry, it was me who screamed," he told me. "Eventually she saw me and left. I came here to be alone, so I'd like to stay that way, if you don't mind." "Sure, Ed. I'll see you in the room. Call me if you need anything," I replied. "Yes, thank you. I know what you did for me, and I appreciate us being friends," he said, walking away. But I knew he was lying, especially since his face was full of scratches, and the footprints I had followed clearly revealed the girl who had screamed. That wasn't his scream. Edmund turned around to go back to where he was, but I didn't go anywhere. Instead, I waited a moment for him to let his guard down, and without thinking, I lunged at him from behind and knocked him to the ground before he could react. Then I gave him a good blow and he fainted, hitting his head as he fell. Without wasting time, I ran towards the place of the scream, and when I arrived, I found Cynthia lying on the ground. She was badly wounded, weak and with marks on her neck, which evidenced that Ed had tried to strangle her. At that moment, I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let this get out of control. When the girl saw me, she began to cry nervously, and at first I thought it was from happiness, that she was grateful that I had saved her. But suddenly, I noticed it wasn't that. The poor thing was terrified, looking behind me with a panicked expression. When I turned to look, I realized the reason. Ed hadn't been knocked unconscious. He just pretended to be out cold and was now coming after us. So I quickly picked the girl up and carried her towards the exit. As I carried her, I could hear Ed running around the gym, looking for us. In the gloom, his footsteps echoed, creating a very eerie echo. I had no idea where he was going to strike, but I knew he would at some point. As we were about to leave, the madman leapt toward me with a knife in his hand, signifying that I had brought him to the rendezvous. We both fell to the ground and began to wrestle. Ed had never been very muscular, but that night, his determination was relentless. I could feel the cold steel of the knife just a few millimeters from my chest, and I knew I couldn't do much if I couldn't get him off me. But suddenly, Ed's strength seemed to waver. It was as if someone had snapped him out of his trance. It was then that the guy I had talked to at the party, Cynthia's ex, he appeared out of nowhere and lunged at Ed. At that point, I ran at him and snatched the knife away, but Ed was freaking out of control, so we both had to throw ourselves at him, beating him until he gave up. Soon after, the authorities arrived. Cynthia's ex told me that he was walking across campus back to his dorm when he saw her running scared and full of lacerations. And that's when she told him that Ed had locked her in the gym and was fighting with me now, so she had come running. The police arrested Edmund for assault and attempted murder, and I really couldn't believe I had let myself be manipulated by a psychopath. As I drove home, I reflected on what had happened. I would never have imagined that such a person could be so close, and I realized an important lesson. things are not always what they seem. If you ever come across someone like Edmund, be very careful, because you never know what dark secrets some people may hide in their hearts. That night, I was left wondering how appearing normal can be the scariest mask of all. Let me tell you about something that happened to me recently. You probably haven't heard anything about this because, well, the parents of the boy involved are millionaires. In fact, they own almost everything in town, so thanks to their influence, this incident didn't become a full-scale scandal. But listen to me. This is what happened. Oh, and just to be clear, I'm not going to reveal real names because I'm a little scared for my life. The last thing I want is for them to retaliate against me or my family. Well, with that said, here's the story. I had just graduated from high school and was in my first year of college. A major change, considering that my high school friends and I have always been inseparable and hung out together all the time. But now we were each in different universities in various parts of the country. However, because of this whole global pandemic crisis, most of my former classmates returned home to our city, myself included. One night, while I was at home, I received a notification on my phone. It was an email from one of my best friends from school that went something like this. Hi everyone, I hope you are doing well. I know most of us are home because of this pandemic, so I thought it would be fun to have a get-together at my cabin in the woods, just outside of town, and to spice it up a bit, I propose a theme. Formal dress code, and everyone must wear a mask, so we won't recognize each other at the beginning. We will only take them off when the party is over. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of the drinks and snacks. You just bring a mask and show up in 2 days. I hope to see you. Sincerely, Jasper. Attaching the address of the cabin, I got super excited when I read that and was quick to call my best friend Freddie. I asked him if he had been invited and he told me he was already looking for a mask on Amazon. I don't know why, but I felt like I was back in high school. I was happy, carefree, like there were no problems in the world. The next day, I woke up early, after a late breakfast and a chat with my parents, and then went out to meet Mike. We went for coffee at our favorite coffee shop and talked for a couple of hours about all the crazy things we did. We reminisced about how we used to skip class to go to parties, and how we always managed to keep our parents from finding out. Freddie even made mention of a trip in his car decorated with pictures of naked Roman statues, and we laughed a bunch. Hey, do you remember Dana? He asked me as he sipped his coffee and looked down. Dana was his high school sweetheart, and they were so in love that we all thought they would end up together. But as often happens with high school sweethearts, they went to different colleges in different states. And, you know, long-distance relationships rarely work out. Yeah, definitely, I said. You guys were like the perfect couple. I smiled as we finished our coffee. Afterwards, we both said our goodbyes and went home. The next day, it was the day of the party, and although I hadn't gotten a mask yet, I couldn't sit idle. So that night I searched the internet until I found the ideal one. It was a white one with 2 holes for the eyes, covered by a mesh that hid the view, and had black lines instead of a mouth. Very simple but eye-catching. I placed the order, and the next morning, it arrived at my door. Since the dress code was also formal, I checked my closet and was surprised to see that my indigo blue jacket from high school still fit perfectly. And so, I was already in front of Freddie's house, ready to pick him up and finally go to the party together. I had no idea what mask he had bought, so I waited in the car, anxious to see him leave. When my friend came out of his house, he was wearing a black jacket, a white shirt, and a golden mask that looked like a minimalist lion or tiger face, or some feline. He was like a jungle cat, but all shiny. Hey buddy, that's a great look. Ready to party? I said with a laugh. Come on, I don't have all day, he replied impatiently, and together we headed for Jasper's cabin. After about 20 minutes of driving, we arrived at the site, and the amount of cars in the driveway was impressive. It looked like a dealership full of vehicles. Are you nervous about seeing Dana? I asked as we got out, but Freddie just shrugged. I don't know. She'll have the mask on, so I don't know if I'll recognize her, he replied as we walked toward the cabin. I just want a drink, he added. As we entered, the place was bursting at the seams with people. Almost all the graduates were there, and the music was blaring. Suddenly, a tall guy in a giraffe mask walked up. "Hey, welcome," he said, and we looked at each other in confusion, so the guy took off his mask and yelled, "It's me, Jasper. I know we're not supposed to take off our masks, but, well, I'm the host," he told us, putting an arm around our shoulders. "Let's go get a drink. This is going to be wild," he commented as he led us to the bar. After a few drinks, we started to loosen up and let go of all our worries. We looked around and noticed that there were a lot of cool masks that night, but one in particular caught my eye. A guy was wearing one similar to the minions from the Squid Game, which had just released it then. The mask was all black with a white circle in the middle. I went over to congratulate him on that choice. "Hey, nice mask, buddy. I watched all 9 episodes in one night," I said, but he didn't respond. He just turned around and started walking up the stairs. I didn't mind too much that he wasn't talking to me, but after a while, it seemed a little weird. After a few minutes, the atmosphere changed drastically when a loud sound echoed, like a gunshot. No one screamed instantly because we were all frozen, looking around us, confused. That's when another shot rang out, this time from the top of the stairs, and we all quickly looked over. And there he was, the guy from the Squid Game, holding a gun up. "Listen, I don't like the party theme. Frankly, I find it boring, so I'll change things up a bit. We're going to do something more exciting now. You're all going to participate in various challenges, and whoever loses, dies," he said in a tone that gave me chills. "What's wrong with you, crazy man? Get down from there with that fake gun," someone shouted. But the one with the gun didn't even answer. "Ah, so you're not going to say anything, huh?" the guy continued. "You think this is funny?" the one on the stairs said as he slowly raised the gun and pointed it at the guy who spoke. Everyone held their breath at that moment, and after a moment that seemed like forever, an explosion boomed in the room and the guy's blood splattered all over the wall as his body collapsed on the floor in front of all of us. For a couple of seconds there was a deafening silence in the place, until the screams erupted and panic took over everyone. For an instant, I went into shock, and my mind replayed the scene over and over again. Most of the attendees started running all over the place, not knowing what to do, and the panicked screams enveloped everything. I stood paralyzed, unable to react. "Calm down," said the guy in the Squid Game mask as he shot into the air again, causing everyone to stop and look at him. "I want your attention. Lock all doors and windows. No one escapes from here," he continued, and I couldn't concentrate on anything else. The truth is, we were too scared to think of anything else but survival. Then we saw him coming down the stairs and we all stepped back a little, as if to avoid being the next to fall. The tension in the air was palpable, and as we watched in silence, the guy walked over to the table full of snacks, picked up a plate of chips, and threw it on the floor. "What the hell is this guy doing?" I thought as I tried to follow his every move. "I want you to line up and leave your phones here," he said, pointing to a container. "We're going to play some games and we don't need distractions." "But I need to call my boyfriend," one girl protested as several of us moved aside to make room around her. We all held our breath as the guy walked up to her and said, "What do you think, huh?" raising his gun again and pointing it at her head. "Come on, don't be shy," he continued, and the girl froze at the sight of the barrel on her forehead. Then he motioned for her to put the phone on the plate, and she very reluctantly did so, followed by the rest of us, who did so almost by instinct. Once that task was completed, the guy issued another threat that gave us all goosebumps. "If I see any of you doing anything suspicious, I won't hesitate to spend another bullet." His message was clear. We were trapped. "Now listen well," he said. "We are going to play 3 games: hangman, hopscotch, and, to finish, duck. Duck goose. Whoever manages to survive all 3 games will be able to get out of this house." Clearly, his macabre game was inspired by the same series as the Squid Game, and since I knew the show, I realized that each game had to have a lethal gimmick, so I had to be on my toes, something difficult when your heart is about to burst and your bones are vibrating with panic. Immediately, the guy ordered hopscotch squares to be drawn on the floor. A girl, using a lipstick, took it upon herself to make the design. "I guess you all know the rules, don't you?" he said. "But there's a problem," he continued, making sure we were all aware of the dark side of this game. "Two of you will stand on the squares at a time, and the one who falls or steps outside will be executed." The atmosphere became even more tense after that announcement, and the terror was palpable throughout the place. It was as if a very dark cloud was hanging over us, and I am not able to explain in words the level of panic I felt, knowing that I would most likely die that night at the hands of a psychopath. Getting shot at out of the blue is one thing, but experiencing the terror of knowing that your life and the lives of people you hold dear are in the hands of a madman, and feeling the panic that any second could be your last, is like dying without dying, if that makes any sense. It's like a torture. At that moment, a guy muttered that if we all cooperated, he wouldn't be able to kill us all. But in the blink of an eye, the assassin lunged straight at the one who spoke. "You lost," he said before blowing his head against the wall. There was a muffled groaning all around and a lot of sobbing, but no one dared to say anything, and an instant later, just like that, the killer announced that the game had begun. We began to play, but it was difficult to keep our balance, let alone with another player in the mix. The first players threw a bottle cap and one of them managed to jump to the end, staying on one foot. The next guy threw his cap and started jumping, but when they crossed paths, one of them lost his balance and fell out of the frame. Immediately, the Squid Game guy approached her, pointing the gun. "No, please forgive me. I want to go home," the girl pleaded, grabbing him by the leg. But that didn't matter. In a second, and without even blinking, he shot her point blank between the eyes after saying, "You lost." That was his third murder of the night, and not a hint of remorse appeared on his face. After that, the terror I was already feeling went up a couple more notches, and now I was about to have a panic attack, and I wasn't the only one. But I had to bite the bullet to keep my calm, because that was what it depended on if I was going to get out of that place alive. It wasn't long before it was my turn, and I confess that I had to make a supernatural effort to focus and not get out of the stupid squares. Each player was going one by one, and I was the last one. As the game progressed, 3 more people lost their lives, and those of us who were left had pale faces and our hearts beating like crazy. Freddy was on the bench, his head down. I looked at him, but I knew he was feeling guilty, thinking that he could have done something to help, because during the game, another of our friends, Eric, who was jumping in the opposite direction to him, lost his balance and fell, and of course he was executed. Freddy felt more affected than ever. For me, it was horrible to see him die like that, but for Freddy, it was worse. Finally, my next turn came. By then, 4 more boys had already lost their lives. Fearing I would be next, I started to jump, and as the other player approached, we looked into each other's eyes in an instant that seemed eternal, and with a nimble movement, we passed each other without falling. "Congratulations," said the boy with the mask. "Those of you who passed the first game can have a drink and then come back for the second game, the hangman." While we were drinking, one guy asked me what that game was about, so I explained the rules as I settled into a circle in the room. Once there was a full group, the killer explained simply, as if talking about the weather. "This is easy. If you miss 2 letters in a row, you're out." I cracked up. What if I don't know the word? I thought, filled with anxiety. That said, the killer took the lipstick the girl had used and started writing on an empty wall. He chose the word, and we started saying letters, each taking turns. I decided to start with vowels, thinking that if I started with that, maybe I'd have better luck and not get stuck. Meanwhile, the tension in the air continued to rise, and I knew we were all at risk, struggling to stay calm as fear consumed us. All the while I was praying that someone might have dialed 911 and that the police were on their way, but given the time that had passed and the remoteness of the place, that was highly unlikely. I realized that the word was 7 letters long. "It's a 7-letter word!" a girl exclaimed as she looked at the executioner. He, annoyed, marked a symbol under his drawing, indicating that he had failed. Others tried, but also missed, until finally it was my turn. The word now had 3 letters revealed: M, T, and I. I concentrated and decided to take a chance. Vowels, now or never, I thought, and shouted, "Letter A." A murmur of relief ran through the room when I saw that I got it right, but the atmosphere became even more tense, as every time someone missed, gunshots rang out, and a new partner died. I could feel the crushing fear in my chest. By this time, there were only a few of us left. Me, Freddie, a girl, and Jasper. The hail of bullets had left only 4 of us. The word was now almost complete. Only 2 letters were missing. My hand was shaking with nervousness, but I had to stand my ground. "Come on, you have to do it right," I kept repeating in my mind, and while I was deep in thought, a shot rang out next to me and my face was splattered with blood. I froze completely and looked to my left, only to see Jasper lying on the floor with a bleeding hole between his eyes. I almost felt my heart stop at that moment. I looked at Freddie and the girl, both with panic in their eyes, and that was the moment I remembered that Freddie was next, and in an impulse to try to save him, I shouted the answer to the word. Mistake. The word is mistake, which is Spanish for mistake. I immediately knew it was a risk to have broken the rules and not wait my turn, but it was an impulse. Then I heard the assassin approach. "You broke the rules," he said, raising his gun toward me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst, and then I heard, "Stop it, you've already killed all these people. Haven't you had enough? What kind of monster are you?" the girl shouted, shaking and crying, clearly having a breakdown. I opened my eyes just as the killer turned back to her. "Shut up," he ordered her, and though she stood up in defiance, she couldn't help what happened. "I hope you rot in hell," he hurled at her before she was shot in the forehead. It was brutal. His mask fell to the ground as she fell lifelessly, and the world stopped for an instant. It was Dana, Freddie's girlfriend. The expression on her face said it all, and the pain in Freddie's eyes was unbearable. At that moment, something snapped inside me, and all the terror I felt turned to courage, and I knew I had to act. In an instant, the killer turned to me and pointed the gun in my face, but in one swift movement I swung my hand with all my strength, avoiding the shot. But before I could do anything, Freddie lunged at him. They were struggling for the gun, and my heart was beating a mile a minute seeing my friend in danger, so I lunged at him too, and together we managed to snatch the gun from him. Once I had the gun in my hands, I pointed it at him and told Freddie to drop it because he already had the gun, and now the control was in our hands. But he didn't seem to hear me. He was so furious, so enraged that he ripped the mask off the guy and started punching the frantically in the face, over and over again, until he stopped moving, and still he kept hitting him until he ran out of strength, and then he collapsed and started crying. At that point, we retrieved our phones and called 911. When they arrived, we told them everything that had happened. The boy was taken by ambulance to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. To make a long story short, it so happened that this boy, whom none of us knew, was the youngest son of an important businessman who owns almost the entire city, who must have paid a fortune so that the case would not transcend. And in the end, it turned out that Jasper was accused of being responsible for the massacre, and the case was closed, while this guy was mentioned as one of the victims. On the other hand, Freddie's and my statements were completely misrepresented, exchanging Jasper for this guy, whose name I will not mention. And if you are wondering why my friend and I did not refute this sentence, it is because, first of all, we received a written threat warning us that we would be very sorry if we did anything, and seeing all the power these people had to do what they did, we knew that we had no chance of getting justice, but every chance of getting very badly hurt, so we preferred to protect our safety and that of our families. We had had enough of anguish and suffering. After this, Freddie and I returned to our homes, and once the quarantine was lifted, we each resumed our lives at the university, trying our best to overcome the trauma of that night and move on with our lives. But this is not something we can ever forget. My name is Dylan, and I have to be honest. During my college years, I used to be one of those troublesome kids that nobody can stand, but I didn't like to bother my classmates. My target was the teachers. I was that guy who laughed out loud while making the teachers rage. And although my grades were pretty good and that saved me from being expelled, my pranks got me into a lot of trouble. However, for me it was all in good fun, until one day I crossed paths with the wrong teacher, and that almost cost me too dearly. Professor Lozano, our Spanish teacher, who by the way was originally from Spain, was always the perfect target. He was the most irritable teacher of all, always yelling every time a student drew a blank, and he made us feel like a volcano about to explode. So considering messing with him wasn't the best idea, but since the other teachers hated him too and he didn't get along with the principal, we knew he would never send us to him. It was a constant challenge for us to play pranks on him, and it was great to see him lose his temper without consequences. One day, Lozano arrived late to class, which was unusual for him, but as was almost always the case, he came in like a tornado without saying a word to us. His face was so serious that I could feel the tension just looking at him, and to my 17-year-old self, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to make him throw his earplugs out, so I decided to start throwing little balls of paper with glue on them every time he got distracted or turned around. When he noticed, he asked who it was, but we all pretended not to know. When he turned around again, I threw one more, and then another. The anger on his face increased every second. He was red as a tomato, and I admit I got a little excited, because if there was one thing I had, it was that when it came to making jokes, I didn't know when to stop, so I kept bombarding him. But one of those times, he suddenly turned around and found me red-handed. However, instead of freaking out, I just let out a mocking laugh. I've been caught in similar situations many times, but at that moment, I didn't really care. It just gave me a lot of amusement. But his reaction was much more intense than I expected. Lozano went crazy, literally. He started throwing things on the floor, kicking furniture, and spouting insults in English and Spanish that echoed throughout the class. At first, my classmates and I laughed, but deep down there was some fear. I had never seen him so angry. To my surprise, he blurted out an order that I didn't see coming. "Get out of my class now and don't come back." Confused and somewhat frightened, I gathered my things and walked out with my head down. How could he say that to me? How could he decide that? He couldn't kick me out of his class permanently, or could he? I barely got out of the classroom and started walking, when suddenly I heard a door slam behind me. As I turned, I saw that Lozano was grabbing my arm quite tightly. "Hey, that hurts," I said, and he, with a restrained fury that gave me chills, replied, "You and I are going to the principal's office now," and pushed me toward the principal's office, which was locked. "Thank God," I said to myself. That's when I heard a jingling sound, and as I turned around, there he was, pulling a key out of his pocket to open the door. Now I had no idea what was going to happen next. As he opened the door, I wondered, if he really hated the director, what was he doing with the key to the address? I couldn't believe what was happening. Lozano made me sit in a chair and told me to wait, while a preceptor called him. "Hey, have you seen Principal Morales? His office has been closed all day. You're the first one in," said a woman entering the room. "No, I haven't seen him. I saw him leave in a hurry earlier, and he left me the key in case I needed it," he replied to the girl he identified as Gina. As I listened to the chatter, I couldn't help but think about playing one more prank on Lozano. Even though we were in the director's office, he wasn't there to give me a good scolding, so the idea of playing a joke on him was tempting. So without being seen, I slipped into a huge closet in the office and hid there, waiting for Lozano to get distracted. The closet reeked of perfume and cologne, as if someone had sprayed a whole bottle to disguise some unpleasant odor. I settled in the back, and suddenly, I felt something fall over my shoulder. No, it couldn't be. I pulled out my cell phone and activated the flashlight to see what was next to me, and what I saw froze me in my tracks. It was the corpse of Director Mauser. His face was purple, and a little dried blood was coming out of his eyes. I was about to scream and run out to tell everyone about this horror, but just as I looked out of the closet, I realized that Lozano was no longer talking to the preceptor. The door was closed, and Lozano had a huge kitchen knife in his hand. Damn ruffian, he muttered as he started searching the room for me, punching and kicking everything he could find. My heart overflowed and I felt like it would burst out of my mouth at any moment. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was now completely terrified and with no escape. At that moment, Lozano approached the closet slowly, as if he knew it was the only place I hadn't looked. "Boy, if you're here, you're really in trouble," he said, as he moved closer and closer and tightened his grip on the knife. The rage in his gaze made me feel my heart stop. I knew he wanted me dead, and that if he found me, he would have no mercy. And now he was about to find me out. At that point, I knew I had to act fast. Adrenaline made me make an impromptu decision, and on impulse I kicked the closet door and threw the director's body towards Lozano. The look of surprise on his face when the director's corpse hit him was all I needed to run for the exit. But as I reached out to open the door, something hit my chest. He had locked it. I started pushing, kicking and screaming, struggling to get the door open before he could reach me. But just at that moment, Lozano lunged towards me with the knife in his hand, aiming directly at my face. I managed to react quickly, but the huge knife sank into my hand like butter. The pain was brutal and I screamed out loud, but somehow that gave me the impetus to keep fighting for my life and escape his madness. The knife was so sharp that after going through my hand, it almost went all the way to my chest. Then I started screaming for help at the top of my lungs, knowing that I didn't have too much time before that madman murdered me just like the director. As I screamed my head off and struggled to keep the knife away from my body, Lozano burst out laughing loudly as he continued to throw slashes at me. "What's wrong with you, kid? Where's your sense of humor? Don't you want to throw a paper ball at me now?" he sneered. At that point, I understood that pranking the professor was not as good an idea as I thought. At one point I fell to the ground, clenching my hand to stop the gushing blood. Then Lozano began to slowly approach, enjoying every second as he prepared for what he knew would be a horrible end. Tears were about to spill from my eyes, and his frantic laughter only made the situation even more terrifying. But just as he was in front of me, I heard banging on the door that momentarily distracted him. "Hey, I hear screaming someone needs help," came Gina's voice, banging on the door. That little distraction was all I needed. Without a second thought, I launched myself toward the principal's window with all my might, shattering the glass into pieces and falling into the schoolyard. The fall wasn't that high, but I landed awkwardly and my leg twisted in a weird way, and my body was full of cuts from the window glass. But that didn't stop me. There was too much adrenaline in my body. I started to crawl, screaming in pain and calling for help, but there was no one in sight. That's when I heard a terrifying sound behind me. Lozano had also jumped out of the window, and apparently, he had found a way to land without hurting himself. I saw him walking slowly towards me with that huge knife in his hand, enjoying every moment of my suffering, while I could barely move. And the worst thing was that I could see his crazy smile, something between anger and laughter, which I had never seen in any human being. When he had me in his grasp, he bent down with the clear intention of plunging the knife into my chest, and in that instant, my whole life flashed before my eyes. I had little hope of survival, but suddenly, a miracle happened. My salvation came. The chemistry teacher who was watching everything from his classroom rushed out to help me. Without a second thought, he threw himself on Lozano, causing the knife to fall to the side, and in a matter of seconds, more teachers and students arrived, helping to subdue Lozano, who was screaming and moving like a trapped beast. Soon after, the police and an ambulance arrived. I had lost a lot of blood from the wound on my hand, but at least I was out of danger. As for Lozano, I learned that he had had a terrible argument with Director Mauser earlier, as the latter tried to fire him. The poor guy never imagined he would end up like that, dead in his own closet. Eventually, Lozano received a life sentence, and I, after a few weeks of recuperation, returned to school. However, after all that madness, I learned my lesson. I would never prank anyone again. The experience scarred me for life, but at least I could say that I had survived a nightmare that seemed like something out of a horror movie. The phenomenon of supernatural beings that haunt or get stuck to a place is popularly known as fixation. Over time, these beings have been given different names, and each culture has its own beliefs as to why they do not leave our world. However, the reasons vary with each spirit, as most have their reasons for not leaving. Sometimes it is because they want to protect a past love. Sometimes it is because they were trapped against their will, and, in most cases, it all boils down to one thing: revenge. Whatever the motive, ghost stories are much more interesting when the places they choose to haunt don't offer much reason to do so. High school may give you some of the best and worst times of your life, but even so, it's hard to think of it as a place where a ghost would feel at ease. El Paso High School in Texas, however, has defied that notion and is known, without a doubt, as the most haunted school in the world. The question on everyone's mind is, what could have happened to give it such a reputation? Here goes the history of El Paso High School and the strange cases that go along with it. This school was inaugurated in 1916, and from day one, it was considered one of the architectural jewels of the city, practically a landmark. That's why it was nicknamed the Lady of the Hill. The campus always had an air of distinction with its marble floors and one of the first concrete stadiums in the United States. Between 1922 and 1923, the name was briefly changed to Sam Houston High School at the request of the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. But this change did not last long, as the community fervently opposed the change, causing the original name to be quickly restored. Over time, the school established itself as one of the best in the world, with outstanding students and athletic teams competing at the highest level. However, with such a rich history of success and promise, darkness also lurked at the school's doorstep. Even from the earliest days, encounters with paranormal figures and strange phenomena began to emerge. The first encounter with the supernatural occurred during the World Wars, when the school served as a makeshift morgue. Because the real morgues were overcrowded, the school's huge basement was temporarily used to house bodies of people brought to El Paso, especially during the Spanish flu pandemic. In World War II, the site was also used as an air raid shelter because of its large structure. Many believe this was the school's first major blunder, the moment that paved the way for the dead to take up residence in its halls. Since then, the school has been marked by the presence of spirits that continue to whisper in the shadows, seeking to make their existence felt among the living. But the school's history does not stop there. Recent investigations revealed that students found early 20th century classrooms in the same basement where the bodies were stored. The oddest thing about these rooms is that despite the layer of dust that covered everything, they appeared to be in pristine condition, as if someone had sealed them in a hurry for some reason. Parents, concerned for their children and filled with skepticism, often wish these ghost stories were pure fantasy, but these classrooms are just the tip of the iceberg of a host of strange phenomena that have haunted the school. Over the years, there have been deaths, suicides, and many unexplained tragedies that have scarred the place. The earliest reports of deaths at the school date back to an early edition of the El Paso Herald-Post, the local newspaper, which in October 1935 mentioned 3 deaths that had occurred in the previous year. A janitor had died of a heart attack, a student collapsed in the gymnasium, and just a month earlier, a parent died of indigestion. Since then, the rare deaths have not stopped occurring. In more recent times, both students and staff have reported hallways suddenly filled with a sticky substance dripping from ceilings and walls. Strange noises, such as scratching, echoing, and shadows, have also been heard when no one was around. The school tried to maintain a certain image and began to punish those who frightened their classmates to the point that some decided to leave for good out of fear, but even this did not work, because the teachers who tried to impose order were just as frightened as the students. Over time, reports of slamming doors and noises that seemed to come from club meetings and games in the gym increased. This happened frequently, and, without fail, staff or locals would check the gym to discover that nothing was amiss, and then the stories about the haunted school spread like wildfire, and students from other schools were quick to comment on the strange experiences of their friends at El Paso High. One of the most terrifying accounts was of a girl who slit her wrists and threw herself off a school balcony. Since that tragedy occurred, the hallways and stairways leading to that balcony have been closed, but the girl's ghost has been seen several times. Many students claim to have seen her on the balcony, sometimes preparing to jump again, and those who dared to sneak through the blocked corridors told of a strange goo falling from the ceiling and a light mist covering the place, evaporating quickly after a short time. A teacher who used to stay late at work related that, returning home one night, he saw a girl in an old blue dress standing at the end of an empty hallway and sensed that something about the situation was not right. So he approached the girl and told her to leave. Despite his attempt to help, the girl's figure did not move, leaving the teacher with a chill he would be unlikely to forget. These stories and sightings continue to fuel the macabre fame of El Paso High School, attracting the attention of those interested in the paranormal and the horrors that have turned this place into a veritable epicenter of the terrifying. The teacher who encountered the little girl in the blue dress says that when the little girl turned around, her expression was one of deep sadness. In that instant, he realized what he was seeing. The girl was not entirely physical, as if she was part of the fog that surrounded her. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. El Paso High School has had plenty of strange encounters and supernatural events, but there is one case in particular that took its fame to another level. It all goes back to a graduation photo of the class of 1985. When all the students and professors posed for the photo, a chilling detail came to light in this image. It turns out there was a girl no one knew or had ever seen before, and the strange thing is that no one noticed her presence at the time the photo was taken. It was those who reviewed the images later who noticed that there was an unfamiliar figure mixed in among the teachers. It was a young girl in a tarnished white dress, and during interviews, all those who attended the photo shoot insisted that the girl was not there, some even admitting that they felt sweaty palms as they posed, but the strangeness increased as they began to seek explanations for the phenomenon. The girl's figure did not appear on the negative, and the photograph was taken years before Photoshop became popular. So although they spent years trying to understand the mystery, there was no clear answer regarding the additional student who had broken into the group photo, and which today hangs in a trophy case at the school. But so far, the girl could not be identified. El Paso High School is still in operation today, and is one of the oldest and most storied landmarks in the United States. And while the strange encounters seem to have died down, no one can deny that it is one of the most haunted schools on the planet. Alumni have shared their opinions after leaving the school, and some believe it's a special place. If I talk about some of the things I saw there, they would lock me up in an insane asylum, said one. Another alumnus mentions that, after graduating, the building felt like a mishmash of stories, and that to say it's not haunted makes no sense. Ghosts are part of what the school is. Admittedly, if these events have failed to change people's skeptical opinion of the haunted school, there is one point that everyone should remember. El Paso High School was the first one built in the area, and so whenever the government or the community needed a space, the school was the first choice. This building has been standing for over 100 years, has seen and lived through eras filled with secrets and terrifying experiences, so it is not uncommon for it to be imbued with a mysterious aura. In short, this is the reality of El Paso High School, and it is only fitting that many consider it the most haunted high school in the United States. The stories that emerge from its halls give life to a dark and fascinating legacy, one that continues to intrigue both those who attend and those who only hear the legends that surround it. So the next time you hear tales of its gloomy atmosphere or strange encounters, remember that this place has borne the burden of its own history. With over 100 years of existence, many agree that within it lies an essence beyond the everyday, connected to the lives and tragedies that occurred throughout its history. Who knows what more stories these places hold? One thing is for sure, the ghosts of El Paso High School are not ready to go away.